Sarah and Emily lived in a quiet town that seemed perfect on the surface, but behind closed doors, a mother's love had twisted into something deadly, and a walk in the forest became a fight for a 12-year-old girl's life. The town of Maplewood seemed like a place where nothing bad could ever happen. Tree-lined streets stretched for miles, with tidy houses that all looked similar, their lawns neatly trimmed and flowers blooming in the spring. Children rode bicycles up and down the sidewalks, laughing and calling to one another. Neighbors waved as they passed by, chatting briefly over fences about small, ordinary things like the weather or a new recipe. On the surface, Maplewood was peaceful, the kind of town people imagined when they thought of safety and community. But sometimes appearances are deceiving, and in one small house on the edge of town, darkness was quietly growing. Inside that house lived Sarah and her 12-year-old daughter, Emily. From the outside, their home looked normal, curtains drawn against the morning sun, a swing set in the yard, and a mailbox with fresh letters waiting inside. Sarah was known to the neighbors as polite and reserved, someone who kept mostly to herself. She often smiled politely when seen in passing, greeting people just enough to avoid suspicion. Emily, on the other hand, was bright and curious, a girl who loved books, drawing, and wandering through the neighborhood with friends after school. She seemed happy most of the time, with a kind of innocence that makes a child's laughter contagious. But inside the house, the air was heavy. Emily sometimes felt a chill even on warm days, a sense that something was not quite right. She noticed the way her mother's eyes would darken when Emily didn't do exactly as instructed, or the sharpness in her tone when she spoke about small mistakes. Sarah had a way of making ordinary rules feel like warnings, small instructions that carried a weight Emily could not explain. Friends noticed Emily sometimes appeared withdrawn after visiting her home. She would avoid eye contact and fidget with her hands. At first, people thought she was just shy or maybe a little stressed from school. Nobody suspected the danger lurking behind the closed doors of that modest house. Sarah's plan had been forming quietly, almost imperceptibly. There were nights when she stayed awake, watching Emily sleep, thinking in ways that no parent should ever think. She researched methods, studied maps of nearby forests, and considered every detail with precision. No one in the neighborhood suspected that a mother could harbor such dark intentions. The thought was unimaginable, the kind of evil that existed only in stories, or so they thought. Despite the darkness brewing inside Sarah, the outside world remained blissfully unaware. Children's laughter echoed through the streets, neighbors exchanged smiles over morning coffee, and the sun shone through the trees, casting long, golden shadows. Maplewood was a town of ordinary life, of routines that never hinted at tragedy. But in the quiet moments when Emily was alone in her room, she sometimes felt a cold sense of fear, a whisper that something was wrong. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, and she couldn't put it into words. She simply knew that life at home was not like it should be, and that worrying lingered in her chest like a shadow she could not shake. As days passed, the contrast between the world outside and the storm brewing inside the house grew sharper. The townspeople went about their daily lives, never imagining the horror that would soon come. Maplewood remained peaceful on the surface, while behind closed doors, the seeds of tragedy were quietly taking root, ready to grow into something that would shock the entire town. Emily's innocence made her unaware of the danger, and Sarah's carefully hidden plan edged closer to execution with every passing day. The calm before the storm in Maplewood was deceptive, masking a nightmare that no one could have foreseen. The morning was gray and overcast, the sky heavy with clouds that pressed down on Maplewood like a warning. Sarah had told Emily they were going for a walk in the forest, framing it as a simple outing to collect wildflowers for a school project. Emily had trusted her mother, believing that nothing could go wrong when they were together. She put on her jacket and laced up her shoes, the excitement of an adventure masking the unease that lingered at the edge of her mind. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves as they stepped onto the narrow path leading out of town, away from the familiar streets and into the dense green of the forest. At first, the walk seemed ordinary. Birds chirped sporadically from the treetops, and shafts of sunlight broke through the canopy, illuminating patches of moss and scattered wildflowers. Emily pointed out a bright yellow bloom and knelt to examine it, careful not to crush the soft petals. Sarah walked beside her, calm and collected, watching Emily closely with eyes that were sharp and calculating. There was no hint of a smile, no warmth in her expression, only a quiet intensity that Emily did not understand. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the familiar sounds of the town faded, replaced by the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional snap of a twig. The trees grew closer together, their trunks thick and dark, creating long shadows that stretched across the path. The forest felt different here, quieter and heavier, as though it were holding its breath. Emily began to notice the change, a shiver running down her spine as the air grew colder and the light dimmer. She glanced up at her mother, hoping for reassurance, but Sarah's face remained unreadable, her gaze fixed ahead as if she were leading them on a predetermined path. Emily tried to distract herself by picking flowers and studying the patterns of leaves, but a growing sense of fear crept into her chest. The deeper they went, the narrower the path became, and Emily realized that they had left the main trail behind. Every step took them further from the safety of town, and her trust in her mother wavered. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches brushing against her arms and leaves sticking to her jacket. Shadows twisted unnaturally, and the sounds of birds and rustling animals became almost eerie in their absence. Sarah's pace did not slow, and Emily began to feel a tightening in her throat. Something was wrong. The realization hit her with sudden clarity. This walk was not about flowers or exploration. She tried to think of reasons to turn back, but every word faltered on her lips. Fear rooted her in place, making her follow her mother obediently even as her mind screamed that danger was near. The forest seemed to respond to her fear, the wind whispering through the trees and the distant creak of branches sounding like a warning. As they reached a small clearing, the sun was almost entirely blocked by the dense canopy, and the ground was damp with moss and fallen leaves. Emily looked around, sensing that this was no ordinary stop. The air felt heavy, charged with something she could not name. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized that this walk was not a simple outing, it was a trap. Every step had led them here, and Emily understood that whatever awaited her in this isolated clearing would change her life forever. The forest, which had seemed inviting and beautiful, had become a place of danger and uncertainty, and the girl who had once trusted her mother now knew that fear was unavoidable. The clearing was small and secluded, surrounded by thick trees that blocked any view of the path behind them. Moss covered the ground in patches, and fallen leaves muffled the sound of footsteps. Emily's heart raced as she realized just how far from safety she had wandered. Her stomach churned with fear, but she forced herself to remain still, hoping her mother might explain why they had stopped in this isolated place. Sarah set her bag down carefully, her movements deliberate and measured. Emily's unease grew, an instinctive knowledge that something terrible was about to happen pressing on her mind. Sarah reached into her backpack, pulling out a long, sharp object wrapped in a cloth. The sight made Emily's breath catch in her throat. The calm demeanor her mother had maintained now felt sinister, almost mechanical, as if every step had been carefully planned in advance. Emily's instinct screamed at her to run, but the dense forest behind her made escape seem impossible. Her mind raced, looking for any possible way out, any chance to survive. She realized that she had been led here intentionally, and the clarity of that thought made her legs tremble. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. Emily's senses heightened, every rustle and snap of a twig sending jolts of fear through her body. She scanned the clearing, searching for anything she could use to defend herself, to give her even the slightest chance of survival. Her eyes fell on a broken tree branch lying nearby. It was thick and heavy enough to be used as a weapon, and she grasped it with shaking hands, feeling the rough bark bite into her palms. Sarah advanced, the sharp object still in her grasp, and Emily's pulse surged. She tried to back away, but the uneven ground slowed her, roots and moss tangling around her shoes. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, yet a sudden spark of courage lit inside her chest. She could not allow herself to give in. Survival demanded action, and she raised the branch, holding it tightly as her mother came closer. Every instinct screamed to fight or flee, and Emily's fear sharpened into determination. At that moment, an unexpected sound broke the tension. A distant whistle echoed through the forest, carried by the wind. Sarah froze, her eyes darting toward the noise. The pause was brief, but it gave Emily just enough time to act. Adrenaline surged through her veins as she swung the branch defensively, forcing her mother to stumble backward. The sharp object slipped from Sarah's hand and clattered to the ground. Emily's heart pounded violently as she realized she had a chance. She bolted toward the forest path, the branches scratching her arms and leaves clinging to her jacket, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly. But Emily ran with every ounce of strength in her body. She could hear her mother shouting behind her, but the sound was muffled by the rustle of trees and her own frantic heartbeat. Every step brought her closer to freedom, and yet the fear of being caught never left her mind. The clearing, once a place of hidden menace, receded into the distance as Emily pushed through the forest, driven by the raw instinct to survive. The danger that had been so close now felt like a shadow she could outrun, but the memory of her mother's intent lingered, haunting her even as she fought for safety. Emily ran blindly through the forest, branches clawing at her arms and leaves tangling in her hair. Her lungs burned with every desperate breath, and the ground beneath her feet was uneven, roots and rocks threatening to trip her at every step. Panic surged through her veins, sharp and unrelenting, as she pushed herself faster, knowing that her survival depended on putting as much distance as possible between herself and her mother. The shadows of the trees stretched long and twisted, and the forest that had once seemed like a place of wonder now felt like a trap closing in on her from all sides. She stumbled over a root and fell hard, scraping her knees and palms on the rough ground. Pain shot through her body. But she forced herself to get up, wiping the dirt from her face and gripping the branch she had picked up earlier as a weapon. Her mind raced, thinking only of escape. Every sound in the forest seemed amplified: the snap of a twig underfoot, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird. Each noise made her flinch, convinced that her mother was just steps behind her, ready to strike. Then, suddenly, she saw a figure ahead, moving toward her along a narrow path. Relief and hope surged through her as she realized it was a jogger, someone from the town who had ventured into the forest early in the morning. Emily's voice caught in her throat, but she waved her arms desperately, trying to signal that she needed help. The jogger's expression shifted from curiosity to alarm as he took in the sight of the frightened girl covered in leaves and dirt. He immediately reached for his phone, calling the authorities, and Emily felt a fragile sense of safety take hold, though her heart continued to race uncontrollably. Within minutes, sirens echoed faintly through the trees. Police officers arrived, moving quickly and efficiently, their presence bringing a sudden, sharp contrast to the chaos of Emily's flight. They guided her out of the forest to the safety of their vehicle, offering blankets and water as they listened to her trembling explanation. Emily could not stop looking back, expecting at any moment to see her mother emerge from the shadows, but the forest remained still, the clearing now eerily quiet. Back in the clearing, officers found Sarah standing alone, her expression unnervingly calm. She did not resist arrest, and there was a chilling detachment in the way she watched the police collect evidence. Inside the backpack, they discovered detailed notes and plans, meticulous instructions outlining her intentions. The investigation revealed the premeditation behind the attack. Sarah had studied maps, researched the forest terrain, and planned ways to avoid detection. The realization that a mother could plot such a crime shook the town to its core, leaving neighbors horrified and questioning everything they thought they knew about the people around them. Emily, though traumatized, had survived because of a combination of instinct, courage, and the coincidence of encountering the jogger. Her escape and the timely arrival of law enforcement prevented the situation from turning fatal. As she sat wrapped in a blanket, staring at the forest that had almost claimed her life, the reality of what had happened slowly sank in. The forest, once a place of innocent exploration, had become a site of terror and near tragedy, its shadows now forever linked to the memory of fear, survival, and the shocking betrayal of someone who was supposed to protect her. Emily slowly began to recover from the trauma, though the memory of that day lingered like a shadow she could never shake. Even in her dreams, the forest loomed dark and oppressive, with her mother's figure always at the center, cold and unyielding. Friends and neighbors offered support, but Emily felt a deep, lasting unease and knowledge that someone so close could harbor such darkness. She returned to school, tried to laugh with classmates, and attended therapy sessions that helped her piece together the fragments of fear and confusion she had experienced. Each step forward was difficult, but Emily's courage shone through, a quiet resilience that inspired those around her. Sarah remained in custody, facing charges that reflected the full gravity of her intentions. The trial revealed the extent of her planning, her careful manipulation, and the chilling premeditation behind the attempt on her daughter's life. Witnesses described the mother as polite and ordinary, with nothing in her behavior hinting at the horrors she had planned. Experts testified about the psychological state that could lead a parent to plot such a crime, painting a picture that was as disturbing as it was incomprehensible. The courtroom was filled with tension, every detail of the case laying bare the unimaginable betrayal Emily had endured. When the verdict came, Sarah was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The townspeople of Maplewood struggled to process the shock, unable to reconcile the image of a friendly, reserved woman with the actions she had taken. Conversations at the local cafe, in schools, and on street corners revolved around disbelief and fear as residents tried to understand how someone could commit such a crime against their own child. The forest, once a place of peaceful walks and weekend adventures, became a symbol of danger, a reminder that evil can sometimes hide behind familiar faces and ordinary routines. For Emily, the healing process was gradual. She spent time in therapy, learned coping strategies, and slowly rebuilt her sense of safety. She returned to the forest only once, accompanied by a therapist, to reclaim the space that had nearly destroyed her. The experience was difficult, but standing in the clearing where the attempt had occurred, she felt a measure of control return. The forest no longer had the power to terrify her completely. She had survived, and that survival became a source of strength. Emily began to speak publicly about her experience in a careful and measured way, helping other children understand the importance of listening to their instincts and seeking help when something feels wrong. Maplewood gradually returned to a semblance of normal life, but the memory of the events lingered in the town's collective consciousness. Parents became more vigilant. Children were taught to be cautious, and the forest was fenced off in certain areas to prevent accidents. Emily's story became a symbol of courage, a testament to the power of resilience in the face of unimaginable danger. The shadow cast by that day never fully disappeared, but Emily's life went forward, marked by both the trauma she endured and the remarkable strength she discovered within herself. Her survival reminded everyone that even in the darkest moments, hope and courage could prevail, and that sometimes the smallest acts of bravery can change the course of a life forever.